Any clarifications? Mr. Jaugian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that Singapore has cordial relations with the US, Europe, Ukraine, and Russia, to what extent have the recent events put our efforts out of balance? And how can we maintain our interests vis-à-vis all the parties? Secondly, are there concerns that the recent events in Ukraine might trigger similar territorial incursions elsewhere, notwithstanding different geopolitical interests and settings? And how may this impact Singapore's interests? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I thank Mr. Giam for those salient questions. We do have excellent relations with the US, with the EU, with Russia, and of course we have diplomatic relations with Ukraine as well. Your question on balance, I would address by bringing us back to first principles, that we do not take sides, we uphold principles. And in this case, the principles at stake are independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity. And I explained just now that Singapore's foreign policy is consistent, is coherent. In fact, it is almost always predictable. And I can tell you now from experience over the past 6 to 7 years, with the privilege of representing Singapore on stage, is that big powers and our neighbors and middle powers have also gotten used to the fact that it's not personal, it's professional, it's principled, and we take a position based on these principles which we believe to be essential for our long-term national interests. And I can also tell you, although there isn't time to go through all the details now, that even in my tenure over the past 6 to 7 years, I've had to say no on occasion to every single superpower. But it has not stopped us from being able to sit at the table, look at each other's eyes, shake hands, explain where we differ, why we differ, and at the same time to pursue areas of cooperation where our interests align and where our principles are shared. So this is not new. This is not a new posture. This, in fact, is a posture that we have adopted for every single year since we've been independent. And I'm maintaining that tradition. Your second question, are the events in faraway Ukraine possibly a model, an inspiration, or an invitation for similar incursions elsewhere? I will not speculate where other clashes will erupt around the world, except to tell you, and I'm sure you are also aware as a former diplomat yourself, that we are not short of hotspots in the world. Again, I will bring us back to this fundamental point that we talk about deterrence. For deterrence to work, first, we ourselves must have the capability to defend ourselves. Nobody else will shed blood on our account. Secondly, having the capability, the arms, the ORBAT, and all the funding that this parliament provides to MINDEF. Capability without resolve, without, as I said earlier, that iron determination to fight and die, to defend and protect what is ours and our way of life. Without both capability and resolve, you won't deter anyone. And there's one additional dimension, that your partner or your protagonist on the other side must also have arrived at that same conclusion, that you have both the capability and resolve to defend. That is how you secure peace in a dangerous world. And the larger point I'm making is that yes, we are standing on principle, and yes, we may even have to pay a price, but this is a price worth paying for the future existence, independence, prosperity of Singapore. Thank you.
Sir Vikram Nair.
I'd like to thank the Minister for, I think, taking a very clear, principled position and explaining how Singapore stands on this. I have two clarifications. The first is the United Nations, I think, has always been an important institution, at least for setting the benchmark against aggression. But would this send a message that it will be difficult to restrain, big powers from engaging in acts of aggression? And is there more the world community can do in this respect? Now, I know Singapore is just a small voice in that, but is there more that the world community can do in this engagement? The second is in relation to specific measures that Singapore may take. I think this will be elaborated on later, but I think it'll be important for whatever we do in this message to send a clear signal that we stand against these acts of aggression and the UN Charter must be upheld. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nair. It is always difficult to restrain big powers or emerging big powers who will always give precedence to their national interests, defined on their terms. So let's have no illusions about this. For what it is worth, having international law, having avenues for peaceful resolution of disputes, having the United Nations with its charter, having instruments like the Security Council and the General Assembly, capable of establishing norms, capable sometimes, assuming there's no veto, of arriving at Security Council resolutions is valuable. And as I've said, that's why we are such staunch supporters of international law and the United Nations. We have to, because the alternative is might is right, or the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. But my point is that you cannot rely on that alone. Every country, big or small, has to have the capability and the resolve to defend itself. Then, to make common cause on the basis of principle with other like-minded countries. And for what it's worth, try to establish norms of state behavior. But human history is replete with conflicts. Conflicts which, when you look back in hindsight, made no sense, wrought far more harm than any objective that was sought at the beginning, or simply miscalculations. So again, I'm making the point that for what it's worth, we uphold principles. We don't take sides. And that is the formula to preserve our future security and prosperity.
Sir Zulkarnain Abdul Rahim.
Thank you, Minister, for the elaborate and detailed explanation. I'm thankful for the answers to my PQ as well, wherein I asked about the assistance to fellow Singaporeans who are embroiled in the conflict. I have two clarifications. First is that I think both the virus and violence are taking a toll on the people in the Ukrainian region. So it's going to be a great humanitarian crisis. And the refugee situation will also be unprecedented in Central Eastern Europe. So what can ASEAN and Singapore do to alleviate the situation over there, particularly given that COVID-19 is still raging amongst us, and there would be some need to render assistance in that regard. Secondly, I'm told that for small countries, we do hold true to the principle of international law, and we denounce the notion of might is right. But at the same time, we still need to know the lay of the land and navigate our way through. So what are the implications in terms of international order, particularly for Singapore and smaller states, given this particular crisis that's unraveling before us? Thank you.
I thank Mr. Zulkarnain for both questions. You're right. The virus and violence are a perfect recipe for a humanitarian disaster, which is occurring right now. I explained earlier in my statement that the Singapore Red Cross has contributed $100,000. Singapore government will also contribute to that, and I'm sure members of the public will also be generous. And we will work through the Ukrainian Red Cross and the International Society of Red Cross and Red Crescent societies. At the ASEAN level, ASEAN has taken a stand that there needs to be mutual respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty. I hope there will be a humanitarian impulse from ASEAN as well. Specifically for the citizens of ASEAN who may be stranded, I just want to share one little anecdote which also illustrates the point. So I said 3 Singaporeans managed to cross the border in perilous times. I can say that at least one did so in a convoy together with Malaysian citizens who were crossing the border into Poland, and I thanked my counterpart in Malaysia for doing so. So similarly on the ground, I'm sure we will continue to work with each other, look out for citizens of ASEAN, and where possible, tumpang, gotong royong, and help one another. And I think these are good, these are teachable moments, good opportunities for ASEAN to demonstrate value and solidarity with each other where it matters. Your second question, what implications of this crisis? Well, as I said, there are multiple. First off, we already feel the economic impact, that Minister Gan will be dealing with this later today. The abrogation of international law and norms is a clear and present danger, especially for small states like us, and that's why we have had to take such a principled stand. And as I said, standing up for principle is not cost-free. So we also have to be prepared for that. But if the world continues to watch with folded arms, we're headed into a much more dangerous world. After the end of the Second World War in 1945 and the establishment of the European Union, I think many people thought war on the European continent was unthinkable. Clearly, that rosy view is wrong. And you're watching, again, war on European soil in an advanced beautiful capital again today. And the point is, if norms are not complied with, and if borders can be trifled with on the basis of all kinds of justifications and sometimes even pretext, then it'll be a much more dangerous world, and especially for us. So bear in mind that actually we are taking a stand not just for this particular crisis, but we're taking a stand for our long-term survival, prosperity, and peace. Thank you.
Dr. Lim Wee Kiang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have two clarifications. One is on the Ukrainians who are currently in Singapore. I'd like to know whether how are we providing assistance to them? If their social pass or work pass expire, are we going to help them to extend meanwhile while the country is in crisis currently now? So do you have the numbers as to how many Ukrainians are currently in Singapore for whatever reasons? Number two, what is the proper channel for us to channel resources to help now? You mentioned about Red Cross is one resources. Will the government have a concerted effort to have fundraising efforts from the public to help the Ukrainian, rather to have multiple websites and we don't know which is the one that's approved and that's authorized? Then also currently Ukrainian president is also calling for a foreign legion to help the country, for fighters to come in. If any Singaporeans were to volunteer to become a fighter to go to Ukraine, will the government object or will the government stop? What is the stand on this? Thanks.
That's actually three questions. I don't have the figures on Ukrainians who are currently in Singapore and the passes that they are on. This is something which IC and MHA would look at, and I'm not in a position to give any blanket assurances on that. And I think I will also have to reiterate our long-held position that we cannot take refugees because we are one of the most dense cities or states in the world. Nevertheless, we'll look at the case by case, depending on the merits of the particular situation. On channels, my advice would be to support the Singapore Red Cross. I think that's clear, reputable, safe, and the Red Cross and Red Crescent societies were created precisely to have a role in such conflict situations. So I would encourage people who are minded to provide humanitarian assistance to work through the Red Cross. On your third question about the Foreign Legion, again, I will have to come back to principle. Singapore does not take sides. Singapore does not allow the import of foreign politics into Singapore's domestic environment. Similarly, Singapore cannot support the promotion or organization of armed groups, whatever their justification, into other countries. So our long-standing rules and regulatory system must continue to apply. So Singapore citizens, your duty is to Singapore, to fight and die if need be, to defend our national interests, and to take a long-term view of what our national interests are. So I would leave it at that.
Mr. Leon Pereira.
I just have one clarification for the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Will the government be exploring the initiation of a common position on this very grave issue with the other ASEAN member states? Is that something that is being considered? Is that something that will be looked at, in spite of the challenges in doing so, which obviously do exist, and that's very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. The short answer to that is yes. All the foreign ministers and our officials have been in intensive contact over the last few days. And as I said, we recently, I think just a day ago, issued a ASEAN common statement. I will be frank and tell you that the 10 of us will have a variety of views. But I'm glad that we were able to issue a consensus statement that reaffirmed mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. I also hope that there will be cooperation on humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, and as I said earlier, also cooperation on helping each other's citizens emerge safely from a conflict situation.
Mr. Lim Bao-chuan.
So let me voice my support for the government's stand on the Ukraine situation. May I ask the Minister, considering China's stand in the United Nations on the invasion of Ukraine, how would this affect our relationship with China? Second clarification required is that would the Minister be able to clarify or explain what does MFA thinks about Russia's statement that they will be putting nuclear forces on high alert? What does that mean? And would Singaporeans who are staying in NATO countries be considered safe, or would there be advice that they were to evacuate from those countries as well? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I'm the Foreign Minister of Singapore, and I would hesitate to speculate as to what China's full position and actions will be. But I can make the following observations. China abstained at the vote on the resolution that was presented to the United Nations Security Council. Second point is China has expressed some solidarity, at least more so in recent times, and some sympathy for Russian concerns. My third observation is that I believe China does hold firmly to the principle of independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Beyond that, I do not wish to speculate, but I do want to assure you that we have been, as always, in constant contact with my Chinese counterparts. In fact, President Halima and I were just in Beijing. I think it was just 3 weeks ago. I'm not even sure that the Olympic truce has expired yet. And I will not be able to reveal details, but we certainly had an opportunity to listen to the leadership of China's views on unfolding events. But that was 3 weeks ago, before a hot conflict emerged. I do not want to be speculative into your second question about the impact of elevation of the nuclear alert. There are nuclear powers in the world. And every time a nuclear power gets into a hot wall, we need to be very, very concerned. Beyond that, I do not wish to speculate, except again to express our hope that there is so much more to lose from letting this situation get out of control. So our hope is that restraint will apply. There will be an immediate cessation of hostilities, of violence. I believe there have been some arrangements for negotiations to occur between Ukraine and Russia at the border with Belarus, perhaps today or maybe even as we speak, I hope those negotiations will bear some fruit. Your point is that this is a dangerous time and we all need to be concerned. Thank you.
Ms. Denise Poh.
Clarifying Singapore's stand beyond declaring our principles. I'd like to ask if government would review the ongoing initiatives, whether economic or defense or cultural initiatives and projects with the Russian government and any of the government-linked organizations, especially for those based in Singapore, and decide what action, after review, to take decide what action it will take that will support the principles that Minister has just articulated.
Mr. Speaker, we've spent quite a lot of time already on this subject. And as I said, we're working through the details, so I don't want to run ahead and I don't want to engage in speculation. But just make the point that we have no quarrel with the Russian people. And I think you are indirectly alluding to the project that we have on the Russian Orthodox Church building. And I would imagine that this is a project which, in my own view, should continue, because this goes beyond the politics and the conflict which is going on right now.